Really excited to welcome you to this evening webinar. 6 o'clock in the Midwest here. Some of you calling in from the East Coast, others from the West Coast. So from wherever you're calling in from, thank you so much for being with us. This is an event hosted by Veterans for All Voters. We're a nonpartisan 501c3 organization that is excited to be joining the coalition of other endorsing organizations, including United America and With Honor, to support the Let America Vote Act. This virtual event is convened in a spirit of collaboration and curiosity about how we can open up antiquated primary systems to allow greater access for registered independents to be able to vote in taxpayer-funded elections. Just a couple notes before we get started about the substance of what we're going to be talking about tonight. A few weeks ago, a bipartisan group of U.S. representatives unveiled a bill to end closed primaries for federal offices. The Let America Vote Act, sponsored by Representatives Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, who will be joining us, as well as Jared Golden, Democrat from Maine, who will be joining us, as well as other members, would require all states to allow independent voters to participate in taxpayer-funded primary elections for president, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House. This bill would also provide financial incentives to states to go further and enfranchise independents in primaries for state and local offices. Currently, 22 states hold closed presidential primaries or caucuses, and 15 states have closed congressional primaries. The Let America Vote Act would enfranchise 23.5 million independents, including a majority of veterans who identify as unaffiliated with either of the two major parties in presidential elections, as well as other elections, giving them the same voting rights as registered Democrats and Republicans. The passage of the Let America Vote Act would be both a welcome reform for democracy and a change desired by the very independents currently left out of consequential primaries. United America, and we'll hear from Nick Troiano, commissioned a poll of registered independents from closed primary states and found that 87% support opening primaries to independent voters. 77% believe it is unfair that they cannot vote in taxpayer-funded primaries. 58% would be more likely to vote for a party that supports independents' right to vote in primaries, indicating that the parties themselves have something to gain by embracing open primaries. And it's not just independent voters who believe that primaries should be open to voters not registered with a major party. A national poll of registered voters commissioned by United America last year found that 91% agree with the principle that all eligible voters, regardless of party, should have the freedom to vote for any candidate they desire in every taxpayer-funded election. Unfortunately, that principle is not reflected in our current election system. And a good step toward changing that reality would be to enfranchise all voters in passing the Let America Vote Act. So we're very excited for this evening's conversation. I want to welcome Congressman Fitzpatrick. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. We know how busy your schedule is, and welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having us.
Well, we've shared your biography in advance, so I'll, if I may, skip some of the highlights of that. But having had a successful career in the FBI, serving our national security apparatus, and now as a member of Congress, I'd love to, first of all, thank you for your advocacy and support for this, and then ask you to sort of describe the legislation in your own thinking and how it came to be, and also why this is something that you've chosen to champion.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And by the way, thanks. I'm thrilled to have your organization. Both Jared and I are thrilled to have your organization behind this now, along with Nick at United America, Rye at With Honor Action. Amazing organizations. Rye sort of adopted me as a pseudo member of the caucus and of his organization, and I couldn't be prouder of them. And I just want to. This is an initiative that I promise you will not regret being a part of. You heard the polling numbers, and I haven't seen any of the crosstabs to kind of dissect any of that. But I can tell you this, and I'm gonna steal a line from Nick, if I may, Nick, because he and I, originally talked about this. There's a number of reasons we need to do this. Number one, it's the right thing to do. We believe, our goal, our aspiration should be for every single American citizen to have the right and the ability and the access to vote in every single taxpayer-funded election. And the two-party system, in many ways, has failed our country. Jared and I are Exhibit A of this. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican, but we don't let our party dictate how we approach a problem or how we solve a problem. Which is why he and I and Maria Perez, Andrew Garbarino is on this bill as well. And when we get back in September, we're going to work really hard to expand this. We want to hold a press conference. We hope you'll all be there. And we want this to be a dominant conversation in this presidential election. I think all the candidates, House, Senate, presidency, should answer the question, do you believe it's okay for a young person or a veteran or anybody in this country who registers independent because or no party affiliation because they don't like the two-party system or they don't squarely fit within a party, do you think that they should not be allowed the right to vote, even though they're U.S. citizens, even though they're registered to vote, and they're taxpayers? And yet we're turning them away in so many states in this country. It's unbelievable. And you know, that's part of it. And the other part of it, Todd, is, and I'll let Jared speak for himself, but I'm sure he's going to agree with me on this. We see the manifestation of closed primaries in action on the floor of the House and the devastating effect it has on policy in America. What do I mean by that? We refer to them as the vote no, hope yes crowd. And for both parties, it's different issues. For Republicans, it's Ukraine. For Democrats, it's border security. You could go through a litany of issues that both parties are culpable of being part of the vote no, hope yes crowd, meaning that they go to the House floor, they believe in a policy, they want to vote for it, they know it's great for America, but they vote no because they're worried about their primary in a closed primary state. Primary used to be a noun, now it's a verb. Now it's something you do to somebody. And when people, the manifestation of that on the floor of the House is you have House members who live in these closed primary states who are going to the House floor thinking not of 100% of their electorate, but of a fraction of their quote unquote base of their party. And that really, it screws up the legislative process. We need to have smart policy in this country, from everything from foreign policy to domestic policy to national security. We need to have the best policy governing our country. And the world needs that, because the world needs the United States of America to be strong. But the only way we can do that is if we have elected officials that are representing 100% of their constituents, not just 30% of one party, which happens a lot. So both on the right thing to do front, in terms of getting everybody access to the ballot box, especially our young people and our veterans, as Nick will tell you, those are the two groups of people that are registering independent and no party affiliation in droves, more so than any other group. So the people that fought for our country and the people that are the future of our country in dozens of states are told, even though they're registered to vote, when they show up to the polls on election day, in 1 out of 2 elections, you're not welcome. And moreover, Todd, in many of these House districts, the elections are won or lost in the primary. So in those cases, you're talking about complete disenfranchisement of these groups. So there's no argument against this, zero. It's very, very simple. It just says that if you're a American citizen, no American citizen can be denied the right to vote in any taxpayer-funded election. States run their own elections. They can decide how they want to craft it. Jared can talk about the system that Maine has. California has jungle primaries. There's ranked choice voting in Alaska. I think that's a part of Jared's system as well in Maine. In New Hampshire, if you're an independent, you can show up on election day and tell them which ballot you want. Nikki Haley got 44% of the vote in New Hampshire. Kristen Sununu is a moderate Republican. The legislature is Democrat. And even though they have divided, it's one chamber, but the governor and the legislature from 2 different parties, they passed their budget with 85% support of the legislature. So we see the positive manifestations of good government that result from this system. It enfranchises all voters, especially our young people and especially our veterans. And it will have a huge positive impact on the House floor on how our colleagues approach their votes and their jobs. So it's good for all those reasons. And I'm just really, really happy we can add it to our list of supporters. And we plan on really rolling this out in a big way and making this a dominant conversation in this election. I yield back.
We're thrilled by it, Congressman Thanks for your leadership, and we want to be part of that dominant rollout and inquiry and challenging our representatives, which we'll be doing coming out of this call as a call to action to all of our volunteers. So your passion is evident. Thank you. Thanks for your leadership, and I want to bring Congressman Golden into the conversation. Congressman, welcome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And I'll just highlight a couple things. Congressman Golden, coming from Maine, serving as a representative there, identifying as a Democrat, having prior enlisted in the Marines, where he served combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He went on to complete the college through the GI Bill before returning to Afghanistan as a civilian to help establish schools for young Afghans. So a impressive history of service to our country before, and now as a congressman, advocating for common sense bipartisan solutions like this one. So Congressman, I just want to ask, what drew you to this? And talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing out there and why you think this legislation is important.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks to everyone, veterans for all voters, to unite to with honor, and of course to Brian, most of all. Brian and I have a long history of working together on, I guess, legislation in the reform bucket. It has been from things like banning members of Congress from using insider information, to trade on stocks and enrich themselves, to blocking congressional pay raises, because we think $174,000 to be a member of Congress is a lot of money, and it's about public service, not about how big is your paycheck anyway. So, in that space, we think it's about service. It's not about what you get out of it. It's not about using your position to get rich. We work together on banning foreign funding out of state referendum campaigns, a big giant loophole in America that's allowing federal money to come in and influence elections here in the United States, state by state. There's a referendum. Anywhere there's a referendum, there's a chance foreign money is influencing that. I worked on banning that in the state of Maine, and now we're being sued in the courts by many a multinational or others who want that money to keep flowing. But on this one, in light of our past relationship on this type of work, and how good of a partner Brian's always been, I was very interested when he brought it to my attention. But I was pretty familiar with it as well. I think it was in 2020 or 2021. I can't remember now. I worked closely with a state senator in Maine on passing a new law in Maine. She did the real heavy lifting, but I was kind of playing the role as a federal member of Congress and advocating for it publicly, doing a lot of like town hall type stuff, stuff online, and just really putting everything I had into getting the legislature to open up our primaries. And we successfully saw that Maine adopted what we refer to as semi-open primaries. So if you are an independent voter in Maine, you can choose in any primary season to vote in one or the other party. So if you want to, in 2024, 2026, you want to vote, let's say in the Dem primary, you can vote in the Dem primary, but you can't vote in the Republican one. In 2028, if you decide you want to vote in the Republican primary, you're still unenrolled, but then fine, you can do that, but you can't vote in the Dem one. We think it's a fair system and make sure everyone gets a voice in the primary as well as in the general. I agree with Brian. It will have a moderating effect here in Maine, in Wood, in 49 other states, or just around the country if Brian and I are successful, and that's very much needed. So I'm happy to be advocating for this with him.
Fantastic. Congressman, thanks for your leadership, not only on this, what we think is a very common sense issue, but other issues like foreign interference and foreign spending in state elections and things that seem common sense, but don't always seem to get to votes and get implemented. So thank you for your leadership. And Congressman Fitzpatrick, I want to go back to you because this does seem like such a common sense piece of legislation, and that reasonable people ought to come together across lines of difference to endorse basic principles that, such as taxpayers ought to be able to vote in every taxpayer-funded election. And the polling also shows that Americans want bipartisan efforts to advance. So how do you see this advancing, and any color commentary on where opposition might come from? And then, importantly, what do we need to be doing as the audience of veterans to help push this over the finish line? Because we do want to be active and supportive.
Yeah. So my sense is that the political parties will be against this. So we'll start there, right? Because the political parties like closed primaries because they get a lot more power and control when their primaries are closed. They have a much bigger influence. The problem they're going to have is good luck arguing, why a World War II veteran who served our country, or any veteran for that matter, who registers independent, is not being given the right to vote when they themselves fought for the right for all of us to vote. So it's an impossible position to maintain. The fight will be by the political parties because they want to maintain power. So that's not a good argument. That's not going to sell amongst the American people. To be clear, the jurisdictional hook that we have, because states do run their elections, that's the way our constitutional system works. And we want states to run their elections. States are experimentation grounds that can decide what system works best for their voters. But our jurisdictional hook is that we provide tens of billions of dollars to the states to help them carry out and enforce their elections. We can tie that funding to certain reforms. And in this case, it's that they can't deny an American citizen the right to vote in any election. We could, a state can choose to adopt Maine's system or Alaska's system or New Hampshire's system or California's or whatever state they want, or come up with their own solution. And it could be a ballot initiative or referendum that the voters themselves decide how they want their system to work. So, I think the important thing is going to be, we need to build a really, really strong coalition. We got to have a great grassroots operation. There's 435 congressional districts in this country. We ought to have a representative as part of our camp on this bill, on this issue, in all 435 districts, to build up their own little, cell, if you will, of supporters, to work with members, staff, to work with the members themselves, and to ask them to get on this bill. And if not, what is their objection to it? We're not telling the states what to do. All we're saying is that you can't deny an American citizen the right to vote ever, because if they're registered to vote, they should be given the right to vote, and not discriminate against people that don't believe in the two-party system. And by the way, more and more people, both Rye and Nick will tell you this, the trend is moving in that direction, and for good reason. More and more people are disenchanted by the two-party system. They don't feel that any one party speaks for them in totality, and they want to be a free agent. They want to evaluate candidates based, regardless of what party they are, based on the issues that matter to them, and they should never be denied the right to vote at the ballot box.
Congressman Golden, building on that, what do you see as the path forward for this? And Congressman Fitzpatrick talking about likely opposition from the two major parties. What do you see as the path forward? And more broadly, do you think that reform's having a moment? I mean, you've been a champion of all these issues. What's your kind of weather on this? And are we having a moment?
I would agree with Brian that having someone take this on in each of the districts would be a really great start. All of the reforms in Maine, election reforms that I've seen in my lifetime, most of which have taken place in the last decade, they were all the result of grassroots citizens in the state of Maine taking it upon themselves and pushing really hard at their state legislature, our governor candidates, whenever, every 4 years, and raising money and putting things on the ballot themselves if the legislature wouldn't act, not taking no for an answer, and then going out there and running a campaign face to face with other Mainers to win the vote. We saw that with ranked choice voting in 2014. the semi-open primaries, the legislature did it, but there was a lot of citizens coming into the legislature and calling their state reps, etc. And we had a lot of momentum behind it in the effort, the referendum here in Maine to ban foreign money from state referendums in Maine. It was incredible. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people joined in a coalition, having rallies at the State House that I took part in, volunteering, phone banking. I mean, a real campaign effort. None of it could have been successful without that level of energy just coming from everyday people. So, I mean, people like Brian and I can lead, but we'll never be successful without masses of Americans standing behind us and saying to their representatives and to the Congress, we want this, and we're not going to sit idle. And the parties do oppose this stuff. To be honest, I mean, they like having full control, and they don't like to see any kind of power taken away from them. I'm a Democrat. Brian's a Republican. Like, two-party system is the way things are here. Even if there are new parties introduced into the system, the Dem Party and Republican Party is going to remain strong and influential, but they will fight against almost any effort that erode their powers. But we're not advocating necessarily that people in the parties need to leave them in order to fix the system, but that they need to embrace reforms like this and work with independent Americans who don't want to be in that system to make sure that they have their rights and they have a choice and a voice in our elections.
That's great. And Rye, I want to bring you into the conversation. Rye is co-founder and CEO of With Honor Action, a cross-partisan political nonprofit that's working and dealing with political polarization, bipartisan issues, helping elevate military veterans and those like Congressman Fitzpatrick who've worked in the national security apparatus of this country. You're really in the background at the center of so many of these bipartisan efforts. And I just want to ask you kind of what inspires you around this. What have you seen through your work with the Four Country Caucus, and maybe a little bit of insight on how bipartisan efforts such as this can come to pass?
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Great to be on with you and Eric Bronner, your co-founder, two Navy veterans, and With Honor is delighted to be a partner with Vets for All Voters, and have been following you ever since. And thanks for helping us set up the organization. We've been going now for about 6 years, a little over 6 years, in fact. And Congressman Jared Golden was elected right when we were getting started. Joined the Four Country Caucus, which is now up to 30 vets in Congress across party lines, co-chaired the caucus last year. And that caucus is one of the few bodies that are actually bipartisan that get anything done in Congress. The group of vets has passed over 150 laws, mostly focused in national security, national service. And we have always looked for ways to engage on structural reforms that can make the body, the Congress more efficient and frankly fight polarization in the United States. Delighted also to be supporting Congressman Fitzpatrick, and we hope that the Four Country Caucus will expand to include additional forms of service. He served in the FBI, as you mentioned, deployed in many places, including Ukraine, and has been one of the leaders in Congress on combating Russian aggression, which has been a key area of focus for us. As we know, bipartisanship is hard. It's not sexy. But it really does matter. And we used to have a lot more of it in Congress. Vets used to consist of over 70% of Congress at a time when it was far less polarized by all measures. Congressman Fitzpatrick and Congressman Golden have ranked every single term that they've been in Congress in the top 10%. And in some cases for Congressman Fitzpatrick, I believe #1, along with Don Bacon, who was formerly a co-chair of the Four Country Caucus. I'm going to stop talking because we got a lot of good questions. And I see a comment as well here from Kate Constantini, our terrific communications director at With Honor, who was Congressman Fitzpatrick's director previously. But I do want to just emphasize that this stuff is hard. It's really hard when you take big swings. It starts like this, and in building coalitions, I believe we have well, it looks like we have hundreds of members that are on this call through our united organizations here. And this is where we need to be advancing the ball. I'm also delighted that No Labels is participated, and thank Congressman Fitzpatrick for being the co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is another, it's the other bipartisan organization that actually gets things done in Congress. So if you're on this call, my comment to you is, this matters. It is a hard lift legislatively. It starts with communications and getting the word out to people that you care about, beating the drum and saying, this is just not okay. You know, over 20 million Americans are disenfranchised. A lot of them are vets. Over 40% of Americans are unaffiliated, are registered independents. And that numbers continues to grow for obvious reasons, because our politics is sickening and exhausting. And we are independents as Americans. We are naturally independent. So this is a righteous battle. We're delighted to be all in for it. And we need your help.
Thanks, Rye. And those of us that are interested in primary election reform, that have had kind of that light bulb moment about the sort of toxic effects of closed partisan primaries, I will say, like, we have a lot of anxiety that members like Congressman Golden and Congressman Fitzpatrick are seemingly an increasingly rare species. It's often veterans that are willing to reach across the aisle. And I think part of our urgency for this work is to make sure that we get more members of Congress like the two represented here tonight to lead with that example of bipartisan cooperation. Rye, I want to go back to you for one final comment, which is you've been at the center of a lot of legislative efforts. We're going to equip our volunteer members with contact information. Our goal is going to be to contact every member of Congress, preferably with a veteran from their district, so to really operationalize exactly that thing that Congressman Fitzpatrick was suggesting, and Congressman Golden, telling the stories about grassroots activism really being the thing that moved election reform in the state of Maine. So we believe that thesis, but any call to action for our volunteers that wonder whether or not that actually is going to make a difference in this?
Oh, the congressmen are best to comment on this, because they're the ones that see it from their constituents. But absolutely, and not form letters. Make your calls. Let your voice be heard. And when you get critical mass in any particular district, our experience has been that actually gains the type of attention that it merits. Both your senator as well as your congressman. I see that there's a bicameral question here, which is, of course, to actually get anything done, you have to have a bicameral strategy. But thanks, Todd.
Yeah. Thank you, Rye, and Congressman Fitzpatrick, Congressman Golden. Thank you for your time tonight. We grabbed 30 minutes. I want to cut you loose, but any final words for the folks tuned in before we let you go?
I just want to thank for Jared first for number one, stepping up as he always does on this stuff. He's my favorite Democrat to work with by far. He and I think a lot alike on this stuff. We also we don't really we don't follow our party leadership on much of anything, which is a good thing, because that's the way the system's supposed to work. And to thank Rye and Nick for this is really, really meaningful to have all three of your organizations a part of this. And the wind's at our back on this stuff. It really is. The message is undeniable. If anyone wants to make the case that a veteran who fought for our country, who registers independent, is registered to vote, but just not to a political party, should be denied the right to vote in 50% of elections in dozens of states in America, good luck making that argument. So I think we gotta get the word out. We gotta rally the troops. We gotta rally the citizens across this country. And the polling is there. And when the polling is there and the message gets out, typically the elected officials will follow. So I think that's really the key here. We are on the side of the angels here. It's a just cause. It's an unstoppable message. It's not one that can be defeated. So we just got to keep up the persistence, and it'll be a good day in America when we get some version of this passed. We may have to get language hits to hitching a ride, as they say, to must move pieces of legislation, CRs or things like that. We don't know how we're going to get this done. The Defending Borders, Defending Democracies bill that Jared and I worked on ended up being the impetus to get Ukraine funding across the finish line. That too is an undeniable message that borders equal democracies and democracies equal freedom. this is a similarly undeniable message. So it's just going to be a matter of being persistent, being organized, having both an inside-outside strategy. So Jared and I will do our thing with our colleagues to try to drum up support inside the chambers. Joe Manchin and Susan Collins are already geared up to introduce the Senate companion of this, which is great news. And then we need our outside allies like the three of you and everybody else who we can get on board to help us with the comms, with the messaging, with the grassroots initiatives.
Here. Congressman Golden, any final words for the audience here?
Sure. Again, I'll return the thanks to Brian, my favorite Republican by far. We do so much together, and I'm sure we will continue to, assuming we defy the odds as we have been for many election cycles in November. So I, as a Dem in a district that votes for Donald Trump, Brian as a Republican in a district that has traditionally voted for Democratic presidential nominees. So I'm pulling for you, buddy. If you looked at, there's a graph from the last Congress. There's like two big blocks, masses of party voting behavior, and then there's these two lonely dots right in the middle, like very far away from the PACs, and that's Brian and I. It's a point of pride. Just thanks for your interest to the organizations and to the people on the call who are going to put in, the hard work of trying to help us get this moving. I'll just share with you a personal kind of way that I've thought about reform and the importance of taking steps to strengthen our democracy and make sure that every American is able to participate and exercise their rights. In 2004, I deployed to Afghanistan. It was mostly a counterterrorism focused deployment, but there was a presidential election for the first time ever in Afghanistan late in that deployment, and we got redeployed within the country to ballot places and routes in between to try and hold off the Taliban, who was threatening violence against anyone who dared to come out and cast that vote. Guys I served with were wounded that day, and we were doing it to give Afghans a shot at something that they hadn't had in any of their lifetimes. And it was amazing to watch them come out in droves. In 05, 06 in Iraq, we did the same thing. We had terrorist elements attacking polling places in the first parliamentary elections in Iraq. That's not why I signed up. That's not why I went there, but it was part of the mission that I ended up doing. And coming home and seeing now that I am in politics, what Brian was describing, there's only about 30 or 40 competitive House districts in the House of Representatives out of 435. All the others have been safely gerrymandered into either safely Republican or safely Democratic seats. And if independents are being pushed out of those primary systems, then that means for, 400, roughly 380, let's say, to be kind, seats elected to the House of Representatives, people who aren't enrolled in a party have zero say in the final outcome because, as Brian said, the race is determined in the primary. The general election is practically meaningless. That's a really sad state of affairs and something that we need to change, and this can be a part of that. So as Rye said, it's a righteous cause. So thanks, Brian, and thanks everyone.
It is a righteous cause indeed. Thank you so much, Congressman Golden, Congressman Fitzpatrick, and Rye for your leadership. It's incredible. As you hustle and do that inside game, just know that Veterans for All voters will be playing that outside game heavily and consistently for the next several weeks and months, and as long as it takes to get this passed, because it is a righteous cause. History is clear-eyed about our efforts here, and our country can't wait. So huge thank you to the three of you for your leadership. And I do want to transition to Nick Troiano, someone I really admire for his leadership. Nick is the leader of United America, which has really been at the vanguard of election reform and is catalyzing this moment as well as this movement across the United States. He has recently produced a documentary called Majority Rules. He's out with a book called The Primary Solution. And United America has really been a leader in funding grassroots movement building, research, and advocacy in efforts such as this one to advance this entire conversation about the deleterious effects of primaries and what we can all do about it as American citizens. And so, Nick, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. That's a tough act to follow and just so exciting and inspiring to hear.
So can you reflect a little bit on what we just heard from Congressman Fitzpatrick, Congressman Golden, as well as Rye? How does this, in your view, fit into a larger picture of effort?
Well, first, I'll just say a big thanks to both congressmen for leading this charge along with their co-sponsors. Their leadership, not just on this issue, but modeling the leadership we want to see in Congress. I mean, the end game for election reform is to have a more functional and representative Congress. And every day, those two gentlemen demonstrate that in being able to work across the aisle on some of the big issues that we care about. So I don't think we can have two better champions for this cause because they truly walk the walk. I will say, how did this fit into the bigger picture? I mean, at Unite America, one of our 10-year goals is to abolish closed partisan primaries in our country so that it is not the case for any voter that if you are registered to vote, that you can participate in every taxpayer-funded election. To date, that's largely been a state-by-state battle, and it's been working. Change is slow, but it happens sometimes suddenly and then all at once. Some states have paved the way. Maine is a really good example of that, as Congressman Golden alluded, and I see Caitlin LaCase as being one of the attendees today. Folks like Caitlin have led the charge successfully at the state level to open primaries to independents. That will continue, and we can talk about how this year is actually the biggest year for state-based election reform on primaries really ever in our history. At the same time, if we're going to get this done in all the states in the country, there will need to be some federal action on this as well, because not every state has a ballot initiative process. Not every state will have a legislature that will get this done. And that's what we've seen in other successful movements in the past, is that successful state-by-state action can lead to more pressure on Congress to do something. And this is the bill that I think fits at that center of what is possible for Congress to do and what would be really powerful for Congress to do. Because as Congressman Fitzpatrick said, it is not mandating a one-size-fits-all approach in every state. It is simply setting the standard and benchmark for states to solve in their own way. So it is a beautiful embrace both of Congress's election clause and of the Constitution to say they can set certain standards, but also an embrace of federalism to allow the laboratories of democracy solve for this issue in the best way that they can. And that's pretty inspiring to me.
I want to pick up on what you alluded to, which is just the state of play of election reform this election cycle. I'm going to presume folks are tuned into the challenges of primary elections and probably wouldn't be on this call if they weren't loosely subscribed to the theory of the case that primary elections, closed primary elections, lead to poor outcomes. And so I'll assume that we're aligned on the thesis. If you're not aligned, get the primary solution and get smart, watch majority rules, and you'll see the impacts of election reform in places like Alaska. But give us, Nick, a little bit of state of play for what is happening this cycle and why you think it marks the biggest year in this movement thus far.
Well, first, I just want to put what's happening today in a little bit of context, because what we're trying to do in renovating our democracy is not a new task for us. This has been the story of our republic since the very beginning. If you rewind the clock 100 years ago, there weren't primary elections because the party bosses handpicked candidates in smoke-filled rooms until people like the people who are on the call today decided that that doesn't make a democracy that we are proud of. And so they demanded more. And 1904 was the first state that said we should have direct elections for primaries. Within a decade, a majority of states did, and now every state does. That's a pattern of reform that we need to bring in now to the 21st century. And so what we see this year in 2024, and why I believe it's an inflection point for our movement, is that there are 6 states that have gathered signatures, close to 1.5 million signatures from everyday citizens across those 6 states to put initiatives on this fall's ballot that would not only open primaries to all voters, but would actually abolish party primaries altogether to go to an all-candidate primary where not only can everyone vote, you can choose whomever you want. You can choose a Republican for senator, or a Democrat for governor if you want, and have different ways of ensuring a majority winner in the general election. So those 6 states include Nevada, Colorado, Montana, Arizona, Idaho, and we're defending an important state in Alaska as well, which is under threat of repeal. So this is a big moment to rise to the occasion. To the extent that we're successful in November, it not only will build momentum to other states in 26, but it will continue to put pressure on Congress to act as well.
That's inspiring, and I think gives all of us hope. Where do you expect opposition in states, and more broadly, if we think about this as an ecosystem of effort, think about this as a 10-year project. Give us a little political forecasting on where you see where we might take a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, so that we don't lose heart for the end game that we're trying to achieve.
Well, to be clear, we should set expectations now. We are not going to win everywhere in November, and this bill is not going to pass probably next year. But no movement achieves its objectives within that short of a time span. I take a lot of inspiration from the marriage equality movement, when leaders of that movement sat down in 2005 thinking they were writing a 50-year strategy for how to win marriage. But it actually happened in 15, and it happened state by state. Then it happened in the Supreme Court. Then it just happened 2 years ago in Congress. And I think the election reform movement will follow a similar pattern. Sometimes it will feel like 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. But the point is, we are further down that road than we were just a year ago. And that's where we're at today. I mean, Alaska passing in 2020, Final Four voting system was sort of a watershed moment for the movement. And now, just 4 years later, to see that similar reform on the ballot in several states is a very big deal. We should not underestimate, though, that the issue that we're embracing here is one of the hardest issues in politics, because it goes directly at the power structure of how our politicians got into office and how they want to stay in office. And so we're facing Democratic opposition in Nevada and Colorado, and Republican opposition in Idaho and Alaska. But let's also recognize the power that we have, especially as independents. Now, this is a movement of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, but just to focus on the independents part for a moment, we're 51% of the country now in the latest Gallup poll. And in this presidential race, guess who the voter is that they want most this November? It's going to come down to tens of thousands of independent swing voters in just a handful of swing states. Let's use that leverage. If you want our vote in the general election, give us a right to vote in the primaries. We should be able to organize around that, especially in the closed primary states. So it is great to see groups like Veterans for All Voters doing that. It's great to see efforts like letusvote.org, which Open Primaries is doing to organize independent voters. We are the largest and fastest voting bloc in the country. It's time to start organizing like one.
Hear, hear. Well, Nick, we are incredibly grateful for your leadership. I know that we're a few minutes over. We like to be punctual and keep military time, even though we were on Navy time starting a few minutes late. But I just want to underscore what Nick shared, which is things happen slowly and seem impossible until they suddenly are fast and seem inevitable. And our real aspiration at Veterans for All Voters is to be tip of the spear in accelerating this movement, creating normalcy around the conversation, getting in direct contact with our members of Congress around things like the Let America Vote Act, getting active in state campaigns, all of which Nick articulated. We've got paid people on the ground, as well as dozens of volunteers who are active in supporting those state-based campaigns to help get those measures passed or defended. And I want to end with a call to action to everyone who's on this call. First of all, if we didn't get your questions answered, feel free to follow up with me individually. And I'll put my email in the chat. We're always available to you. Feel free to find us on veteransforallvoters.org. All of our volunteers are publicly listed. We have 450 folks from across the country identified on their state pages. Find them. They're real people. They care about this issue set, and they want to be engaged with you or campaigns that you're supporting. And then Jameson put in the chat a link to our engagement strategy. So we have teed up an outreach strategy that is going to be the core focus of our organization for the next several weeks. We've given you boilerplate text to do outreach via email or to call your members of Congress and get a live response. We want you to customize that, personalize that for yourself. And we've also linked congressional contact info. And we want you to go there, grab that spreadsheet, add your contact info next to the members that you're committed to contacting. And our goal is going to be that we contact every member of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, from folks in their state to get them on the record to say, do you believe that every citizen who is a taxpayer, who is here, legal, has the right to vote, that they should be allowed to vote in every taxpayer-funded election? And I think it's an unimpeachable argument. How they do it, to Nick's point, is up to the state. But we think it's an unimpeachable argument that every voter ought to be able to vote in taxpayer-funded elections. And so let's make this a big push. I believe that we can get an outsized impact these next several weeks. And huge thank you again to everyone who's tuned into this conversation, to Congressman Fitzpatrick and Congressman Golden for their leadership, to Rye Barcott with Honor, No Labels, Unite America, and a coalition of the willing. We'd love to see Republicans, Democrats, partisan organizations, nonpartisan organizations, conservative organizations, progressive organizations come together on an issue that we think ought to cut across political ideology because it anchors us in what makes us truly American. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and do stay in touch with us as we proceed with this effort. You'll be hearing more from us. Thank you all.